Hi, everybody. Welcome to Two of the First. It is April 21st, 2026. I'm Ryan Ballengee. It's great to have you here with us. We're going to spend a lot of our time on today's show talking about what the hell is going on with LIV Golf, whether it's done, whether it's toast, whether it's done now, later, whether it's an inevitability, if there's still an opportunity for LIV to continue to exist, what happens to PGA Tour players that might have to reabsorb the LIV Golf players, what that might look like. Will any of them be welcomed back under the returning member program? Lots of questions to get through. And then I also want to spend a few minutes just talking about Matt Fitzpatrick and the great little run that he's been on, winning twice in his last three times out, and then also getting the opportunity to team with his brother this week in New Orleans and about to become a father. Just a few minutes on really the good time that he's having in life right now. Well, let's start with LIV Golf. So last week, Ryan French really kind of set things ablaze in this kindling that had been developing about LIV Golf. There were some reports earlier before Ryan French, who does Monday Q Info, great guy, shared a tweet and then got into what's called spaces on Twitter called the Takesman. And it's basically a video or a voice chat between users. And he had said in the tweet, bombshell announcements coming from LIV Golf about its future, more or less saying he's not a betting man, but if he were betting, I'd bet the under on anything. And then went into the chat, the Takesman, and basically said they could shut down as soon as this week before the Mexico City event. And he had heard that from several sources. That kind of then set things off. And I think that set people who maybe do this a little differently than Ryan does. He's in Michigan. He tends to cover Corn Ferry Tour and kind of developmental tours and underrepresented tours, underreported tours. But that doesn't mean he can't go and cover the PGA Tour, LIV Golf, etc. But going to talk to people who fly to lots of events and specifically for the PGA Tour and do it for enormous media outlets, places that earn hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And those people started doing their reporting. James Corrigan of The Telegraph in London reported that there was going to be an emergency meeting of LIV Golf's executives in New York, presumably at their offices and presumably with their Saudi backers. And that all of the executives who had been in Mexico City were summoned to New York for that meeting. Then, with all of that in the air, LIV Golf saying nothing about it, they didn't have news conferences as they scheduled on Tuesday. They didn't release tee times as they typically do on Tuesday. They said that was technical difficulties in the media center. That's why media couldn't come into the media center. They didn't have the news conference. Ultimately, they did a day later, and they did release the tee times on Wednesday for their Thursday start in Mexico City. However, by that time, the reality of the situation had been revealed, which was that the Saudi Public Investment Fund, which owns the vast majority of LIV Golf, let's just say 95 to 97% of it, was cutting funding for this project that had cost them somewhere between $5 and $8 billion. And that feels like a rounding error for a $1 trillion investment fund. But they were cutting financial support for that as part of their new 5-year plan in running their PIF investments. So they sold a soccer team that they own, Al Hilal. They got out of a multi-year contract with the WTA, the Women's Tennis Association, for a multi-year deal to sponsor their rankings and then also host the season-ending event. They got rid of ambitions to host the, I believe, Rugby World Cup in something like 2035. So this wasn't the only thing that was being cut back. It was just the one that affected golf most obviously. What we don't know is if that funding cutback also relates to the Asian Tour. They basically fund half of the Asian Tour schedule with the international series. We don't know what that backing will look like. Will it continue to exist? Will it go away? We don't know that. But there wasn't really anything from LIV Golf to say externally, none of this is true. None of this is happening. There really has never been that kind of response in terms of a kind of press comment, right? So Scott O'Neill, who's the CEO of LIV Golf, then sent an email internally to players and staff saying, hey, full steam for this season. We have funding for this season, and then basically we'll figure it out after that. We won't have the funding of the Saudis. That's always kind of been the point, to break away from having that money accessible and turning it into a profitable business. And then O'Neill went on TNT Sports, which does some of the international feeds for LIV Golf, and said, more or less, we know we have funding for the remainder of 2026, and then we have to figure it out after that. That's our challenge. Now, that then was scrubbed off of that interview that was posted online and then re-uploaded without that part. So we basically have the information that we need to know at this point. And that is that the Saudis have decided to cut funding after this year. We don't know if the decision to continue funding this operation was decided upon in that executive meeting, in that meeting in New York. We don't know if that choice was made then and there. That was a salvage effort from the existing executives, or that was a Saudi decision on their end, how that all worked out, or whether that was known in advance. We do know that the Saudis injected $266 million into LIV Golf's United Kingdom-based limited corporation. They have to publish those documents through Document House, and that was done in February. So you could assume that that was the only funding they got for the year, but they also have a U.S. entity. That entity doesn't have to report because it's private. It's not public. So we don't have that documentation. It could be a similar injection of capital to fund effectively the whole year of LIV Golf operations between the United States and internationally, although obviously there's more international events, so you would assume that would get more of the percentage of funding. Whatever that looks like, we know that they have that money, and that was really the last dime they were going to get from the Saudi Public Investment Fund. What we didn't know is if that was going to be clawed back and zeroed out and everything would be done, or what would happen moving forward. Would they be allowed to finish the season? Would they have certain events? Would they have to scale back purses? Those types of things, right? And there still probably is some shadow of a doubt about that among people who are kind of rooting for LIV Golf to go away, that at any time they could pull the plug. And I suppose that's possible, but that's kind of what we know at this point, that the funding is going to end, and that is now incumbent on the LIV Golf executives, many of which who apparently were going to be fired after the Masters tournament. And we still haven't seen the fallout from that quite yet. But whatever LIV Golf executives remain and whatever staff remains, that they are going to have to find backers and investors to keep LIV Golf going. And there are a lot of expenses to cover, right? There are 13 individual tournaments with currently purses of $30 million. That's $390 million. They have a $50 million season-ending tour championship. Now we're at $440 million of prize money before anything else happens. Then you have staffers with salary, right? Then you have concerts, you have venue payments, you have all the other stuff that makes venues happen. LIV Golf has apparently been notoriously slow in paying vendors, had been slow in paying players. There had been some talk among the players of potentially not playing if those pay issues weren't resolved before the Mexico City event. And ultimately, they did play, right? They played Thursday through Sunday. Jon Rahm won in a runaway after a great final round. It's his second win this year. He's in the top 20 in the world again because they get world ranking points. And they're going to play again in May, second week in May in Virginia, basically my backyard at Trump National, Washington, D.C., just over the Potomac River. So that's their next step, right? That's their seventh tournament of the year. They have 7 remaining on the season, and then who knows what happens after that. But it is now up to LIV Golf to figure out, can they find people to inject billions with a B of dollars into this business that has not made money, right? Tournaments, they say, are profitable. Some of them, handful of them. And most of their teams, 10 of 13, are profitable as well. Kind of problems with that. One, 10 of 13 teams could be profitable, not only because they have some commercial deals, and many of them do have some commercial deals, but also because they get millions of dollars injected to those teams from the team purses from these tournaments. That's gifted money from the Saudis, and that money's doubled this year from $5 million per tournament during the 13 regular season events to $10 million. And also the $50 million purse goes to the teams, basically. So that is kind of how they have managed to achieve profitability through a mix of capital injection from the Saudi-backed purses and then some commercial deals. Would that be the case? Would 10 of 13 or whatever be profitable if that money from the Saudis wasn't there, or isn't there moving forward? I don't know, right? I don't know the ledgers, but that seems kind of likely, right? And then you've got to find a way to not only make, a scant few of your events profitable, you have to have it cover all of the prize money, all of the costs, all of the concerts, all of the other stuff, the setup, workers, concessions, all of that stuff. And what profitable for an event? Does that mean the costs specific to that event, including prize money or not? We don't know that. So there's a lot to figure out. And if you're an investor, you know that LIV Golf doesn't have a big audience in the United States. It has struggled to gain that kind of traction, even now on Fox for some of their events, some of their rounds. Some are on FS1, FS2, but more of them are on Fox than not. And whether that can ever be bumped up with additional investment, who knows? And that contract probably doesn't make them a lot of money with Fox. Probably makes them a little bit, each week relative to their expenses. But it's certainly not covering it all. Unlike, $700 to $800 million that the PGA Tour gets from its television partners every year, on top of having sponsors fund the purses and then some, getting fees for that, having local-based organizations handle everything about a tournament unless it's under their championship division. That really kind of creates some efficiencies that have worked for the PGA Tour for a very long time. And that's before they get to talk about the $1.5 billion investment in their subsidiary, PGA Tour Enterprises, from Strategic Sports Group. So if you're trying to convince someone to invest in LIV Golf, you've got to give them a path to profitability. If you want them to invest in one of these franchises, which you have 75% control of, at least some are 100%, then you've got to convince them that they can somehow make money without the subsidy. And I'm not sure that that can be proven at this point. So Scott O'Neill's got a tough job in front of him, and he's going to try it, right? I mean, he's going to try it. I don't think he's just going to back out one day. But now there are questions to the players. Do you want to stick through this? If you're Bryson DeChambeau, who's in the final year of his contract and has been negotiating with LIV, presumably both sides in good faith all the way through, do you back out of those negotiations knowing that there's severe doubt about the viability of this business moving forward? That if the money doesn't come in, there's no money going to him. And it's made me wonder if when he won in South Africa and was emotional about it and said that there's something he couldn't talk about, that was the emotional thing, that he knew the funding was going to be cut, that he knew his bargaining position went and changed dramatically because of the availability of funding, what that was going to look like for him personally. I also make it a point to bring up that Phil Mickelson played the South Africa event. He hasn't played any others, and he didn't play the Masters. And whatever he's going through, and hopefully he's okay, and his family is okay. But it makes me wonder if he played that event specifically thinking perhaps he knew that this could be the end. If you kind of line it up that way, the course of events makes you wonder if by South Africa, some of the players perhaps knew that the funding could be gone as soon as the end of the South Africa event, or that the end could be near, and that somehow it worked out that they got the funding to keep going through the end of this year and to see if they could get investors that are not Saudi-backed PIF money through 2027 and beyond. We shall see if all of that happens. But now the PGA Tour has to decide, do we welcome back some of these players if and when LIV Golf ends? And the reality is, I think the PGA Tour only wants two of them. They're willing to accept three of them. They want Jon Rahm and they want Bryson DeChambeau, rightfully so. And they would take Cam Smith under the auspices of the returning member program, which, by the way, was like a 6-day deal. And that window was open, and then it shut just before the LIV Golf season began. So would the PGA Tour consider reopening that program with different consequences for the players that have won major championships since LIV Golf started? Maybe that's the starting point. Maybe you make the charitable donation even higher and you ban them from getting FedEx Cup playoff money for 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is. You make the penalties steeper to welcome them back, but you welcome them back. And then to the other players who maybe had PGA Tour status and they've lost that, you can keep your status, but you're still going to serve that 1-year suspension from your last day of playing a LIV Golf tournament. So that would bring you into August or September of 2027 to be eligible. And if your exemption runs out, your exemption runs out, kind of thing. They could do that. And then for the vast majority of players, they don't really have status on the PGA Tour. You could either go back to the DP World Tour, where 8 players are members. You could go to the Asian Tour and try to kind of plow your trade there, but who knows what's happening with that investment at this point. Or you can go to Monday qualifiers and Q School, and some of the guys who are 50 plus can try PGA Tour champions. They're going to have a suspension to deal with too. But there doesn't seem to be an appetite for a special pathway for a vast majority of these players to come back, because there are fewer spots now on the PGA Tour. There are 100 exempt cards from the points list. There's the 10 players that come from the DP World Tour. There are the 20 players who come from the Corn Ferry Tour. There are the 5 that come from Q School. Those are the spots. That's it. Everybody else, find your own way in. And I think that's going to be the reality of the situation for many of these players. Like I said, Rahm and DeChambeau, and I guess Cam Smith, because he would come under this window. I think those are the ones that really have any chance of coming back. And even then, they're not going to do it until the end of the season. They're getting paid to play these events. LIV Golf could try to claw back that money that they've been paid as an annual upfront salary for participation if they chose not to play. So I would expect them to finish the season, both Rahm and DeChambeau. And while they are probably discussing what their options are after this, that's the reality of the situation. They're going to have to probably come back to the PGA Tour and try to do it that way. I know Bryson has said he would consider just doing YouTube golf, but he likes making money just like anybody else. So I would assume he would want to make money on the PGA Tour. It would also explain why he played poorly at the Masters, apparently talking to multiple different organizations and people about next steps if and when he chooses to leave LIV Golf. That's a pretty big deal. That probably pretty distracting. Add on that he was 3D printing irons and messing with wedges and all this stuff, equipment-wise, leading into the tournament, and kind of makes sense why he didn't make the cut. And really just boiled down to poor bunker play inside the ropes. So that's the situation. That's where we are with all of this. And then I think we have to kind of see what happens that we don't know about, right? And there are lots of known unknowns, which is, can the Saudis change their mind, right? They could change their mind and go, you know what, we're back in on golf. They could find alternate investors, alternatives for capital. They could scale back purses. They could shutter entirely at any time, right? There's lots of different options that we don't know about yet. And I guess we'll see what happens with those. Meanwhile, the PGA Tour has decided to make a change in their schedule. This came out last night, first through Sports Business Journal, and Josh Carpenter does a great job. All things golf business, PGA Tour business, that PGA Tour is getting rid of the Aloha swing as we know it. This has been something that's been bandied about for months. The Century was canceled in the fall due to a water dispute and a drought situation and in Maui. And both those things kind of combined to leave the Plantation course in pretty rough shape. And they made that call to just kind of cancel the event for the year. And the players who would have gotten to that event that otherwise wouldn't have gotten to a signature event, so a tour winner, right? They got to play the RBC Heritage last weekend. So that was their make good for that. And Century just kind of seemed to be okay with it. They're the title sponsor of this event through 2035. A number of their executives went to the Farmers Insurance Open at Torrey Pines. Farmers Insurance Open, as we know it, is done and dusted because Farmers isn't coming back. Also, there's probably some doubt about whether Zurich, because Zurich and Farmers Insurance are one of the same company, whether that will continue after this year. We'll see what happens there, of course. But the team event is this week. But there is a realistic possibility that the season starts in San Diego at Torrey Pines moving forward, which would be kind of interesting, I suppose. But, you know, a short field event, the Century would just move from Kapalua to Torrey Pines, which would be a pretty nice way to start the year. I mean, at least you're looking at the ocean. And that would be a pretty decent kind of make good for Hawaii. But the Sony Open in Hawaii is done. Sony was not going to renew its title sponsor. That ended after the playing this year of the event. Chris Goddard won. And we knew that was kind of going away. We knew it was pretty much done and dusted. So it sounds like the PGA Tour is in negotiations to now create a PGA Tour Champions Aloha swing that would have the Mitsubishi Electric Championship at Hawaii on the Big Island and the Sony Open in Hawaii and Honolulu in Oahu. Those would be the season opening events for the PGA Tour Champions. Obviously, it would cost way less money. You could probably get a sponsor for it pretty easily at the price point that the PGA Tour Champions plays at, $2 to $2.5 million for a purse instead of $10 million at a minimum for a purse. So that seems like what's going to happen there. I'm very sad about that. I love watching Kapalua. It's a great course. It's completely different. I know the guys dominated and par doesn't really matter there, but it is really fun to watch a different brand of golf being played to start the year. The Hawaii views are incredible. Wailea, Seth Rayner design is so fabulous. Hopefully we'll still be able to watch that as part of the PGA Tour Champions, I suppose. But feels like the end of an era. Kapalua have been the host to the season opener since 1999. And this is it. Last champion at the Century at Kapalua is Hideki Matsuyama, shot 35 under total in 2025 and set the 72-hole PGA Tour scoring record against par in doing so. So there's your bow for Kapalua and the Century in Hawaii, and also for the Sony Open in Hawaii, which has been around for the better part of 55 years on the PGA Tour schedule. So things change. It's unfortunate, but those events are very difficult to be profitable. The Tour have been subsidizing the Century since it went to a $20 million purse. Sony Open was not making the money. It's a different era where it's not just about charitable giving. You have for-profit injections of capital, and they want to return. They don't want to lose money. So that's what's happening in Hawaii. Few just minutes here about what Matt Fitzpatrick has been able to accomplish the last few weeks. Won the RBC Heritage. He beat the world number one Scottie Scheffler in a playoff with an incredible birdie in the first playoff hole. Just between him and Gary Woodland hitting two of the really greatest flighted long iron extra club shots you're ever going to see into a really tough pin on a tough par four into the wind. That was really cool for him to kind of have the comeback to the fans who were chanting USA, USA, as though it were the Ryder Cup, which I found kind of strange, but whatever. He was fine with it. I found that kind of a cool moment for him to kind of put his ear out and go, yeah, we got another one on you. And hopefully that kind of amps up that rivalry a little bit. Not that it needs to be any more heated than it is, given the way that the fans were at Bethpage last fall. He's won 2 of his last 3 starts. He almost won the Players. Probably should have won the Players, but it was Cam Young's day to do it. So second place there, wins the Valspar the next time out, has a pretty okay Masters, and then wins this at one of his favorite places in the world. And on top of that, 10 days after winning in Tampa, he and his wife, Catherine, announced that they're going to be expecting their first child. That's coming in 3 months from now. That's great. That's great news for the Fitzpatricks. And then this week, Matt and his brother Alex, who's already won the DP World Tour this year, are going to team up to play the Zurich Classic in New Orleans, the only PGA Tour team event officially on the schedule, not the President's Cup, not the Ryder Cup, stuff like that. So really, really cool stuff for the Fitzpatrick family. They're having a great time, man. He's number one on the money list, close to $10 million earned this year. Doing pretty all right for himself. Number 3 in the world. It's really cool to kind of see how someone can kind of reach, not the depths. I mean, it's not like he was thousands in the world, but not as good as he was after he won the U.S. Open. Claw his way back, improve himself, get better, get back to where he was, and he's paying off big dividends on the work that he's paid, to get himself to where he needs to be and where he wants to be. And it's still a pretty big climb to get to the Masters champion, the back-to-back Masters champion, and the clear world number 1. But if there's a B tier, he's the top of the B tier. And that's a pretty cool thing to happen in the space of basically a month and a half. That's incredible. That's a big time of your life. So Scottie Scheffler, for his part, has been second multiple times this year. He's a winner. It kind of feels like he and Nelly Korda, who has won once this year and been second 3 times and only lost to 2 players all year, Hugh Kim twice, and then Lauren Coughlin in Las Vegas, are kind of having a similar year. So hopefully for both their sakes, at least, they can then go and win the next major they play. For Nelly Korda, that's this week at the Chevron Championship and Memorial Park in Houston, where they play the Texas Children's Houston Open. For Scottie Scheffler, that would be the PGA Championship at Aronimink in a little less than a month's time. And I have a good feeling that he's going to play extremely well at that tournament just outside of Philadelphia. That's going to do it for us on this episode of 2 Out the First. Thanks so much for watching or listening. If you got a question, email me. Just chat about life or golf. Ryan at thegolfnewsnet.com or Ryan Ballengee or Ryan Ballengee Golf, depending on where you're looking on social media. Follow Golf News Net on any platform at Golf News Net. Back with another show later on this week as we get things going down in New Orleans and in Houston.